Typically what they'll do is they're going to use a police number or some sort of laboratory number. They're not going to do it by name. And they're going to say, so the analyst ought to be preparing everything in order. So the calibrator should be prepared first. Then if they're going to do a mixed standard, that should be prepared next. Then if they're going to do a blank, that should be prepared next. If they're going to use one of their blood controls, that should be prepared next. Then they're going to start doing the defendant samples. And because usually they do 2 of those samples, they'll do maybe 10 samples. So 2 vials each from 5 people. And then they'll throw in a whole blood control so that they can prove that it's still working correctly. And they'll fill it up in that order all the way through. And so the first thing they do is they come up with this computer list and say, this is where every vial is going to be in that carousel. So we open up our tube of blood, and we're going to pour some of that into something called a cuvette. It's a small plastic cup. So they open up that gray top tube with the client's blood. They pour a little blood into there. We're going to add this internal standard, the propanol, into everything we test. And we use something called the Pipetter. And you can see we've got the blue substance and the yellow substance, and it has put them together and made a green substance. So when we talk about a Pipetter, it's a fancy eyedropper, because what it does is it measures out a certain amount of liquid and transfers it somewhere else. So we're measuring out a certain amount of blood, a certain amount of an internal standard, and we're putting that into a tube. And it's a Headspace vial. It looks like this. They are 2 or 3 inches tall. Many of them have these type of caps, which you can see it's not a screw-on cap. Maybe you can't see. If you can't, either way, it's not a screw-on cap. They have to actually crimp it closed. They have to take, I don't think they use pliers. I think they have something fancier than that. But they have to seal it up around this glass tube. And this is metal. And in the middle of the metal is this little rubber part where a needle can go through to pull out a sample. So usually when we're filling these up, labs tend to either use 100 microliters or 250 microliters of blood, and about 10 times as much of the internal standard. This is 100 microliters of blood. It is 2 drops of blood. So out of this 10 milliliter tube of blood that they have drawn from your client, they are testing him or her using 2 drops of blood. Yeah, and the 250 microliters, 5 drops of blood. If they make a mistake, if they put in too little blood or too much blood, 3 drops instead of 2, that is going to screw up the reading. That is going to artificially inflate the reading. So it's that easy. If you have half a drop of blood too much in there, you have changed the reading of the person's BAC.
I was getting my groceries and I saw this kid come in and he had this giant big gulp cup and he was pouring it in to a coin sorter, and I thought, hot damn, there's a great analogy for a gas chromatography machine. Everybody knows what a coin sorter is, and I thought it was especially relevant to our experience here in Las Vegas. So both a coin sorter and a gas chromatography machine are sorters. The coin sorter machine is used to sort and count the amount of each type of coin in a mixture. The GC machine is used to sort and count the amount of ions, or gases, at a specific retention time in a mixture. So we have both sorting and counting from a mixture. But how well does a GC stack up against a coin sorter? Let's take a look at how each of them work. The coin sorter will take a mixture of varying coins of varying physical characteristics, dimensions, widths, metals, as well as other coin-shaped things that could potentially go into the coin sorter, such as slugs, buttons, washers. The machine operates by sorting on physical characteristics. The lighter and the smaller fall out first, followed by wider, heavier, denser coins. Each one of those coins is then counted The face value of the coin is then multiplied by the coin's physical characteristics, and a total amount of what's in that cup as well as what is in each group of coin is then presented to you, and the total amount is calculated. Things that shouldn't be in there but could be counted, like I mentioned, are buttons, slugs, washers, foreign coins. The coin manufacturers recognize that this is going to be a problem, and they make these machines very, very strict in the way that they validate what gets counted and what doesn't. And they even have a little bucket that all the things that shouldn't be counted get thrown into. GCs don't have those. They count everything. Everything is a disc. It doesn't matter if it's a penny, a quarter, a dollar, a slug, a button, a washer, a peso. It all gets counted, and there's no value assigned to them. So the GC, if you want to make the analogy, has a gas mixture. It's like different coins floating above the level of a liquid. Those different gases, represented by those different colored spots, go onto the column. The column sorts those spots based on their physical characteristics, and then they're eluted to a detector as a function of time. But how do we know which of those dots matches up with which of those peaks? We don't. We have to rely on the injection of a standard that the analyst will purchase and inject on there and say, well, if ethanol in my standard comes out at 0.25 minutes, then anything in the client sample at 0.25 minutes will be ethanol. It won't tell you if there's anything else also co-eluting at 0.25 minutes. So if a single column GC was a coin sorter, it'd be a pretty shitty coin sorter. It only counts the number of discs eluting at a certain time. It doesn't tell you how much of each of those discs is worth, because it can't identify them. A penny, nickel, dime, button, slug, or dollar, they're all the same. It also cannot tell the difference if a quarter and a slug came out at the same time. It would measure them as two discs. They're not differentiated, but they're added together. It basically shortchanges you information about the mixture if you don't run it right. So the GC needs to be vetted to see if there's co-elution, if there's been anything added to your client's ethanol peak, and how did they identify that?
And, somebody said before, ask in voir dire, ask the juries, what would you expect to see with someone who's impaired by alcohol? Let me tell you, they're usually way off the chart. They're throwing up, their balance is bad, they're falling down, they got a lampshade on their head, or whatever the heck they end up telling you. They're going to tell you stuff that later on you can use in your final argument. You may get some of them on the jury, you may not, but they remember what it was. So you want to talk to them about that. People don't walk that way. Okay, they don't walk that way. Did you see Mr. Jones? I'll play it again for you, ladies and gentlemen. You can look at it in the jury room. When he said, would you stand over there, Mr. Jones? You saw him walk. He walked fine. Okay, do what is normal. The standard field sobriety testing manual lists 6 clues for the officer to look for when stopping a car. Not many of these are you ever going to get, folks. Remind him of this. Did he attempt to flee? Not many of my clients do that, and probably not many of yours. No. When he came up to the window and you said, roll the window down, was there any response? Yes. He rolled the window down, didn't he? Yes. So he listened to you? Yes. He did what you said? Yes. Did he have a slow response? No. Okay, did he have an abrupt swerve? Let's assume that he didn't. You're going through these things. Did he make a sudden stop? No. He pulled over. He pulled over safely? Yes. He hit anything? No. He stay in the car as you directed? Yes. So he listened to you? Yes. Understood you? Yes. All this stuff that is normal, bring it out. Bring it out. They're going to have you do these machination tests and all these directions, which are totally confusing with somebody that's frightened and nervous. Okay? Did he strike the curb or other object? Most of the time, the answer is no. You're going to get no's to probably 5 or 6 out of these. The standard field sobriety test instructs the officer to observe the defendant when approaching the car for the first time. Okay? Not many times have my clients slumped over the wheel, and the ones that are, I don't go to trial on it. Okay? Is he leaning against the window? Not many are doing this. This is what they tell him to look for. Ask him this. Say, your manual tells you these things. Let's talk about each one of them. Answer no, 1. Answer 2. Did he have his foot on the brake with the brake lights on or not? I don't know why that means a shit. I don't know what the hell that means, but it does. Did you observe the car to be in park the correct way for the client to act? Most of the times they're going to do that. They're going to stop, they're going to put it in park. Why these are important enough to put in NHTSA, I don't know, but they're there, folks. So cross-examine them on the normal. You take nervousness into effect, we kind of covered that. You look to see if the person can follow directions. Isn't that big? Why is it big? Ask them. You know, people say never ask a question why. Bullshit. I don't believe that. The reason I don't believe it is because the jury already knows the answer. They already know the answer to those kind of questions when you say the word why. And you don't care which way he goes.
I want to also talk to you about linearity, setting up a breath testing device for linearity, because that's part of this calibration process. See, what happens is when the machine comes from the manufacturer, before it arrives at the police station, they run a full calibration check. Very often there's a 5-point factory calibration curve. So let's say they put a known reference standard of 0.05, an 0.8, they put in a 1.5, they put in a 2.0, they put in a 2.5. Let's say they put in 5 samples. The machine then graphs this line. So we know that if the absorbance is here, we know what the BAC is. Obviously, we know here it's at 0.5 or just below it. We know if it's here, we know what it is. We know if it's here, we know what it is. Does that make sense to you? If you have 5 points on a curve, you could know where we are in between. Does that make sense? Because what this device is doing is it's measuring the absorbance of energy and it's plotting a graph. That's a calibration curve. We teach the machine, we program it to say, listen, if you see energy absorbed here, you know it's a 1.0, so report it at a 1.0. That's all a calibration curve is. Now, I've seen 2-point curves. Now, if I calibrate here and here, I could plot a line and I could know what lies in between. Make sense? It's a little less reliable, but if I have 2 points, I can now know that this machine is calibrated from here to here. What about up here? Can I know what's up here? No. Can I do anything down here? No. This is your calibration curves in your states. If you have single point certification, we have no idea what's on the other side of that number. The only thing that the machine is calibrated to read, if you use an 0.8 standard, is what? An 0.8.
Just before the driver performs the walk and turn, and just before the person performs the one-leg stand, the officer has to ask the person, do you understand all the instructions? When you break it down like this, a lot of times officers will understand how important it is, okay? Officers are told when they go through this field sobriety course, look, these tests are objective, they're supposed to be fair. Okay, that's always a key word in field sobriety class, is fair. These tests have to be fair. Well, the walk and turn has 17 different instructions and demonstrations that's getting thrown at that driver in a 45-second time span. Is it really fair to throw all 17 instructions at someone, then say, okay, go ahead and perform the test, without saying, do you understand everything? Of course, it's not fair. Okay, and I've seen officers finally give in during cross once you use the word fair, and they'll say, yeah, you're right, that's not fair. Okay, one-leg stand, 13. 13 different verbal instructions and demonstrations the person's thrown at that driver on the side of the road. Is it fair all of a sudden to then say, okay, begin the test, and start grading them without asking them, do you understand? Of course it's not fair. These are the sections in the manual where it tells the officer it's required to say, do you understand the instructions? That top bullet there is for the walk and turn. The one below, it's the one-leg stand. It is required. It is one of the administrative procedures. In my opinion, if the officer does not ask the driver, do you understand all these instructions, then all clues are unreliable. Because if your client steps offline or raises their arms as they're doing the walk and turn, there's no way we know if they knew they had to do that, or if they understand they had to keep their hands down by their side because the officer didn't ask. That's the theme on that. So that's a fatal error.